Well, welcome back to our podcast, Health Bite. I'm so happy today to be with Dr. Mary Rensel. Dr. Rensel is a neuroimmunologist and has so many great pearls to share that are evergreen and also so relevant to our present situation. I was going to say at the tail end, I'm hoping, of the pandemic, where we hope that we are at. So welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled.
Yeah. So neuroimmunology sounds so profound and almost intimidating. Can you tell us a little bit about what that specialty entails?
It's not intimidating. Yeah, it's just us. Yeah. So my favorite word ever is something called psychoneuroimmunology, because that word is definitely
Not
intimidating.
intimidating at all, right?
Right. And the first time I do remember, I remember the first time I saw that word and I was like, I need to break this down. What does this mean? And I love the word because it really tells us a lot about ourselves, how our psycho, means our psychological health, and then our immune system and our nerves, how it all matters and how it interacts. And we've heard a lot about that with COVID, how to support our immune system through the stressors of ongoing risk of infection, et cetera. And so we've learned, what it actually matters, like what we eat and how we sleep and how we interact. And if we have any skill with emotional processing, it actually matters for our immune system, which is pretty cool that we could do things, like you said, little bites, little things each day to really lead to long-lasting change and potentially even, avoiding a serious infection or a serious infection. So it's pretty neat, what all things that we can potentially modify day to day or really enhance with just some knowledge. It's not dramatic activities. They're very doable, but they really matter.
You're right that your specialty and your area of expertise really brings together kind of everything that we're grappling with right now. So, in the lens of infectious disease and what are the things that we can do to enhance our immunity, as well as the mental health and psychosocial stressors that have been imposed upon us, right, in the midst of this pandemic and change in routines and work life and family life and all the other things that come with this. This is really a perfect cross section of bringing those two things together. And it seems, and I'm sure you'll tell us more, that these two areas really do come together, immunology and psychoneurology. Really go hand in hand, right?
Yeah. And I think if one thing I want to hope for, living through a global pandemic, I'm hoping that we've all realized the importance of our day-to-day actions to support our healthy immune system and getting through a very stressful time. So, if you asked your friends, I asked my friends, what are some things that you've started doing since the pandemic? And even me personally, I put it in my journal now, like when I'm going to meditate and when I'm going to journal and when I'm going to lift weights and when I'm going to get my cardio, because I don't want to miss it, because sometimes I look at my week and I'm like, ooh, where can I squeeze it in? I got to get it in here somewhere. So I've realized when I don't do those things, it makes a dramatic difference for kind of how I handle my week and kind of my emotional state. And the nice thing is, we can influence those things by just some simple skills. And that's why I love, your podcast, how you talk about breaking it down, little bite-sized information. One of my favorite things is if we're trying to put our brain into more positive emotional state, if we can stay in a positive emotional state, it's our more creative state. So if we can do that, and how do we get there? How do we encourage it to get there? Some simple things like just gratitude or compassion, like, just having compassion for someone or for yourself. Like, this was a busy day. I got a lot done already. Sometimes even by the time you get to work, you've already done, 10 things. You think, that was pretty good. Just some compassion, a little gratitude. You know what? I'm able to walk to work. I'm able to see. I'm able to speak. I'm able to think, thank goodness. Sometimes you have to go back to the basics of what you're grateful for to get your brain into that healthy state. So they say you need like 3 positive to counteract 1 negative. Our brain likes to stick in negative. I think a great example, I was reading in a book lately that said, think about someone that said something bad, like, oh, you didn't like your outfit, or we didn't appreciate that comment you said. Like, think about someone who said that something in the last year. I bet you still think about it and know exactly what they said, but think of the last person who said you looked nice, or, they liked your, what you that mentioned in the meeting. You're like, you just let those things go, but that's what we really have to hold on to, are the positives. So 3 positives to counteract 1 negative.
Yeah,
To
there's
keep our
so
brain
much.
like in a good state.
Yeah, there's so much that you said there that I really want to kind of piece out.
Mhm.
The first, you started by talking about some of your habits that you have implemented in a very structured and routine way. And I think one thing that you're right, we have kind of realized during this time is that these habits like exercising or movement or meditation that were maybe aspirational, we are
Mhm.
now realizing how critical they are to our emotional and physical well-being.
Critical,
Um,
yes, agree,
and,
100%.
and right, and because of the fact that our routines have been kind of out of sorts, that we really need to be even more intentional about maintaining those habits. And I love the idea of schedule time, right?
Mhm.
So really making it enforcing, the necessity to get around that. So I like that tip. And I think if we can talk about like an actionable health bite, it is, and I know we'll talk about some of these behaviors in a little bit more detail in terms of what it actually does for our health, but,
Mhm.
plugging that in. Um, I think the other thing that you began to touch upon is kind of positive psychology, right? So
Mhm.
some of the things that we can do, like gratitude practice, so let's get into that a little bit further, because before we talk about the negativity bias, right?
Mhm.
So let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about the positive psychology, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the data or the evidence behind it, because
Mhm.
sometimes we feel like self-compassion and gratitude are kind of these woo-wooey things, or like Dan
Mhm.
Harris says, Pollyannish things, but they are
Mhm.
actually grounded in science.
Right. Yeah, there's some really interesting studies. There's a group here. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and there's a group here at Weatherhead, our business school at Case. And they did some really interesting research looking at um, coaching. So when people are getting their MBAs and they went through some professional coaching, that if a coach started with a positive session to the person rather than starting with a negative session, and the negative session was more just like data, like, did you read 3 hours? Did you get this done? But the positive session was, envision, what could it be like, what, like, dream a little bit, just kind of big, wide open questions. And if the coach started with positive questions, they always liked the coach better. They had more positive memories of the coach, and they actually succeeded better in their studies. They got more done. They got more research done if they even one session with a positive based coach. So I think, we can all do that. We don't have to hire a coach. We can just have those times with some like big open thinking. So what could it look like? What are some possibilities? Not reality necessarily. Don't think of, how you're going to solve every problem, but just really big, wide open, think down the line. What's important to you? So yeah, if we're trying to achieve that positive mental state where we're more creative, and I like efficiency. So when I get something done, I look at my week. I want to get as much done as I can, but still have some fun and, get my work done so I can still be with my family or friends in a safe way. And I want to do anything I can to be efficient at work. And so one of the ways to do that is to get out of the stress, nervous, fear, task oriented only thinking, but get to the bigger creative thinking, because sometimes I would miss patterns if I'm only focused on one task or very stressed about a task. I'll miss kind of what the world or what nature is telling me where I should go with a project or some bigger ideas in relation to some of my projects. So there's some things we can do to manipulate, how creative we are, how novel, how innovative we are. So that's pretty interesting, right? And so what does the data say? The coaching data is pretty clear that positive um, value-based coaching is really important if you're trying to get someone to change or to think about some new solutions. And then just structurally, when you think of the nerves themselves, if you want to think of them as like little branches with all these little ends to them, like a fern or something, Our body makes more of those if we take good care of our brain. So the brain is an organ that needs a little attention and support. And, if we're in a positive emotional state, the nerves actually connect, are more efficient, and the more we do things. So if something's scary or new to you, the more you practice it, the more your body's going to try to be efficient with the connections of the nerves, so that it's easier and easier. And we think of that as learning, right? And being a master at something.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking, it makes me think that in this particular time where, some of the concerns that I hear from patients, and quite frankly, what I have experienced myself in
Sure.
multitasking from home, right, is
Mm-hmm.
that focus has been very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of what you're sharing with us is clear data in terms of how positive psychology or maybe gratitude practices or beginning the day with a positive intention can actually help those connections between the brain cells or the neurons
Mm-hmm.
and actually help promote productivity. And so something that I think even like general public is starting to hear about is neuroplasticity, right? Which is what you're referring to the fact
Sure.
that our brains continue to grow past childhood and that we can actually rewire the circuitry of our brain to make ourselves more productive in this particular case, just
Correct.
based on some of these feel-good gestures.
Isn't that neat? And there's also some
It
neat
is.
studies suggesting and showing that, if you have a big day coming up, if you get a little exercise that morning, you will be able to handle the stress better, so that you can turn on some factors called neurotrophic factors, like factors that support the nerve functioning. You can adjust that. You can enhance that with some of your behaviors as well. So movement, exercise can help that. Mindfulness can help that. Like you said, gratitude can help that. So we all want an efficient, easy, productive day at work, and there's some ways that we can manipulate that by
And
our behaviors.
let's stick to or focus a little bit on the exercise piece.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that movement or exercise can actually turn on neurotrophic factors or these, factors or hormones, so to speak, that can help juice up or ramp up the brain activity.
Mm-hmm.
And even right now that in a way we have so much more time, but we really have so much less time, despite the fact that we're not commuting, etc. Time is always a boundary for people. So tell us, is there like a limit? How much do you have to actually do that exercise or movement to reap those positive benefits?
Right. I think that's still being figured out exactly how long. Like some of the researchers, like there's a researcher at MIT looking at nerve health and how they connect, and she concluded that you need at least 30 minutes at a time. But like the coaching team here, within at Case Western, when they looked at it, they found some benefits to the positive psychology if you did about 15 minutes throughout the day. You broke it up 3 times. And what did that mean? So what did that positive psychology mean? That it was even as simple as like petting a cat or dog, so like connecting and that emotional contagion, like, your dog or cat loves you, you love your cat, like that, like back and forth with emotions can set you in a good place, kind of reset you if you've had a busy morning on Zoom all morning and take a little break, or just some movement. Yeah, just to take a break and to kind of rewire, reset. So there were some, the coaching group found that if you had some renewal moments throughout your day, even if they were 5 to 15 minutes, it seemed to matter, even if it was as simple as stopping and having a conversation with somebody else, outside of a work project, not a stressful conversation, more of a, enjoyable conversation.
Yeah. And it sounds like you can do mix and match, right?
Sure.
So
It's
you can
a
do
good
maybe
thing.
15 minutes of exercise and then 15 minutes of dog petting and then 15
Mm-hmm.
minutes of connected conversation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that was really neat. And so that's not long. And then it doesn't take a lot of products or skills, to do those kind of things. But the connection, as we know, connection has been so challenged, and we know that, but there's some safe ways to do that. And it looks differently. It's like this, on Zoom or what have you. And just unfortunately we have to, this is as good as it gets sometimes to see people's faces and not be able to experience all the interactions that you have when you're in person with somebody. But that really matters, to have those connections. And sometimes that looks different. Like I've heard people are starting to write letters, or, or go for walks with a distant, from a distance together. I've seen walking groups out, but everyone's spaced, so, it's just nice in any way to connect with a human, because our brain really likes that. We're tribal, we're used to having people around us, and we don't always love that. We feel like that's a challenge. We don't have the time for that. We're too busy for that. But actually our days would likely be more efficient if we put some connections in our days. Like we said, little breaks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all great information. And I did want to get back to, what we termed as negativity bias, and the fact
Mm-hmm.
that, sometimes, or often, or always rather, the human mind focuses on the negative. And that's kind of physiologic too, right? Like, it's not being a
Right.
Debbie Downer necessarily to
Correct.
fixate on that negative comment, to use your example, as opposed to
Right.
like all the positives. So I think that in and of itself is an important point, that that experience is human and normal. We all do it.
Yeah, it's a safety mechanism. So the brain wants to remember negative things for safety. So it's fine. So you just have to say, thank you, brain. Thank you for remembering that. I'm going to move on. I'm going to think of 3 good things, to counteract that. But that is a safety mechanism. And that's why, you stress alone is not a bad thing. As you know, it's what gets us moving. If we see a fire, it gets us moving from a fire. It knows if we're thirsty, it gives us a stimulus to go drink water. So stress is okay, but when we have excessive chronic stress, that can really affect our work performance. And that's been clearly shown in many studies. So it affects our concentration, our cognitive ability, just being able to take in data and make some good decisions or get some good innovative ideas. It's harder when we're always feeling stressed. So that's where if we want to manipulate our emotional state, we want to try to put it in some positive phases throughout the day. So that we can still be task oriented, which is our stress mode a little bit, but then also our creative side can also come out periodically. And then, we also have to acknowledge that, we have to express our emotions throughout the day. So one of the recommendations is 3 times a day, write down 3 feelings. That doesn't take too much. You might want to write down what you were doing, and you might then see a pattern. Say, oh, I'm always upset when I see X. Maybe I could preempt that with a little walk or a stretch before I have to do that X activity, because now that you see throughout your week when your negative emotions are coming up. So becoming aware of your emotional phases kind of throughout the day, and just learning some tips and some tools on how to emotionally process. Some people say, I just don't want to go in that closet. That's a closet. That's a place I don't want to go to. I don't know if I'll ever come out, but really just naming them gives them a lot less power. And I think that's the power of sometimes when people meditate, you imagine a balloon with a feeling on it and it floats away, or a fish swimming by with a feeling on it and it goes away. You give it less power. It's when we don't talk about it, we don't know what, we don't want to deal, we don't want to approach it, that sometimes then it will have some power over us.
Yeah, I think I like to reiterate the point of our inability to discern fear,
Mm-hmm.
and stress or danger, right? So our emotional brain will take nagging children or yelling bosses or tigers or fire
Mm-hmm.
all in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so our body's response is to react to that in a certain way, which is just stress or fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And but these measures that you bring up are actually ways that have been shown to dampen that response, right?
Right.
Drive down the
Right.
heart
Just to get
rate,
you, yeah,
drive
and
down.
you can acknowledge, yes, thank you. Thank you, brain. That's evolution. It kept us always scanning the environment and looking for anything dangerous, and that's fine. We're glad to have that. We want to be safe. We're crossing the street. We're always kind of scanning. But yeah, we don't, at least in Cleveland, Ohio, we don't have many risks of a tiger getting us. So yeah, we need to learn how to counteract that, and just to acknowledge it and just to be able to recognize it. That's also helpful, because that is something we don't like. A lot of people choose not to, talk about emotions throughout the day. I'm working. I don't have time. Who has time for that stuff? I'm just trying to get my work done. But the fact, if we can just pause, and that's all it took, one of the studies showed it was really productive if just 3 times a day you just wrote down 3 emotions. It really made a difference in people's focus and productivity, just to acknowledge that, yes, you have feelings. Yes, they come throughout the day. Yes, you can have 10 emotions at once, and then obviously, see a professional if you need help with, just some tools and stress management, et cetera, because that's been really helpful for a lot of people during all this stress.
I
with
think the
COVID.
point that you make that, perhaps people don't want to engage in that, or they don't want to wallow in that. But in fact, it's the opposite, right? So if people are able to give it the attention that it needs and to name it, then you can create some space between you and that thing, as opposed to being all consumed by it. That is a practical strategy.
Yeah, because sometimes you get to a point you're like, I don't know what's wrong. Something's wrong. Something is wrong. I can't focus. I'm not getting anything done. So if you had a habit of just kind of checking in with yourself and knowing that it's not your job to fix the feelings, we're not saying anything about fixing them. We're just naming them. If you need help fixing, that's where there's a lot of professionals out there to help with that. But if you just need some basic tools to how to, number one, even know what's going on in your emotional state throughout the day. There are typical patterns, and so some people notice every time before I walk into this meeting, I feel X. Well, then you can take that information and make a plan for it, once you realize your daily pattern.
So we've talked so far about these techniques and strategies on how to manage acute and chronic stress, naming your emotions, being more aware and maybe present to them, how that can improve our focus and our productivity, which we are, eternally and consistently concerned about. I'm interested, though, now to bring it back to the immune enhancement or the immunology piece. So I think what people are less aware of is how these practices actually can help boost your immune system.
Isn't that amazing? So yeah, there's been really interesting studies showing meditation, which you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a Buddhist monk level of meditation. You could be a very new meditator. There's been some interesting functional MRI studies and immunologic studies that, pretty quickly, even if you're really new at meditating, you can put your brain kind of in a more creative, calm state, which is pretty neat, so that we have that power. And when we get there, if we live in chronic stress land, if we're always in chronic stress, our immune system is always ready to fight. And so it's kind of stunned by a lot of cortisol in our system. And so then that actually decreases our ability to fight things off. So when we're in more of a relaxed state throughout our day, our immune system can, balance like it needs to and be ready for whatever approaches it, rather than us making a natural hormone, which is cortisol, because we're stressed, which is actually, something that makes it more difficult to fight off infections.
Over time, high cholesterol,
Sure.
cholesterol. I'm always talking about metabolic health.
Yeah.
Overall,
Cortisol,
high cortisol
Yes.
does help suppress the immune system. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit, because I think this data is so fascinating, and maybe it's because I'm just like a data nerd, but
Right.
can you talk
Me
a
too.
little bit about, but I do think it's fascinating for everyone to know for example, the functional MRI piece and the
Sure.
changes that they see in people's brains by checking brain activity. So I'd love for you to give an example of that, as well as maybe one of the examples of how very concretely the immune system is changed with some of these behaviors or practices.
Sure, yeah. So there was an interesting study, again, related to coaching and, starting with a positive session, and they talked to some students. They were undergrad students, and they talked to them about their vision. What's important to you? What are your values? How do you envision yourself in 10 to 30 years? What could it look like? Like really those wide open creative kind of questions, rather than, did you do your homework and did you read and did you check these boxes? And when they put the various groups, either the very open-ended positive vision-based, value-based questions, and compared to the group that was talked about, just assignments, they saw different areas of the brain lighting up in each of the group. And the one area of the brain that was most lighting up in the very positive group was the envisioning area. So it was the part of our brain that helps us see things and kind of plan movements. And that was the area that was more often lighting up with those folks, which was pretty neat. And then the other group was more like the stress level of the brain, and routines and part of the brain, and the other group, which was more of that, like the assignment group.
So it speaks to, again, that enhancing your creativity when you
Right.
open your mind and explore in that way, which I think
Right.
is so it gives validity to rest and play for even the super productive individual.
Isn't that
But
great news? Yeah,
it
that's
really
right.
is,
We
like,
want you to have
thank
fun for your,
goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Thank goodness. We can prescribe fun
I
now,
know,
right?
that's right.
And
Yes.
so tell us also, though, about the immune enhancing benefits of these
Yeah. So,
practices.
if we know there's a certain part of the brain that reacts to stress, and if it, it's our hypothalamus, our deep, in the center of our brain, it will release certain hormones and chemicals related to hormones when it's stressed, when it's perceiving danger. And the interesting thing, I don't know if anyone is listening, has tried guided imagery. But that's a time when you can close your eyes and you can just take your brain to your happy place. Like, I love nature. I could close my eyes and think I'm in a, beautiful forest, and I can hear the birds. And so my brain thinks that's where I am, right? So I can just take my brain out of a stressful place and learn about the tools of guided imagery, because there's been some studies showing that if you learn those tools like meditation, guided imagery, you can adjust your immune system to a more reactive, healthy state, rather than thinking you're always in stress. So it's pretty neat that we could take our brain to our happy place ourselves, like within 10 minutes, closing our eyes. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go anywhere risky with COVID. You can stay home, close your eyes, and pretend you're on the top of a mountain or flying, wherever, whatever your happy place is, at the beach, what have you.
Playing the drums. I
Playing the drums.
fantasize about
Yeah.
playing the drums.
There you go. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. And then you try to envision all the senses. Like, what does it feel like playing the drums? What do you hear? What do you feel on your hands? And, what are you seeing? And then suddenly, like, you don't even remember what you were stressed about, because you've totally detracted and distracted your brain from what it was perceiving as fear. Because the other way to do that is just taking a walk in nature. So a lot of people are home Zooming and staying online all day long, and it's really hard on the brain to keep that focus. So the way to do that is to go out in nature for a little, 5-10 minute walk, but don't take your phone, don't put your AirPods in, and just, you just take in what you're seeing and hearing and smelling. And that will really, again, detract and distract from what you were perceiving as fear or stress,
And
something to worry about.
physiologically, those factors that signify a higher stress response, like heart rate and respiratory
Yeah,
rate and skin temperature,
right.
these physiologic parameters all settle down too. So I like to point that out because it's
Yeah.
actually a physical sign that your body is responding. And they've shown that being in nature helps rev all of that down.
Isn't that amazing? And I always, as a brain doc, I always think of the brain during those times, because the brain is kind of at mercy of the blood flowing there. So if there's not good blood flow because we're worried, we're constricted, we're awaiting for something to happen, we're obviously not getting good blood flow to the brain to help us be more creative, because the brain is at our mercy. And the other thing to know about the brain is it's really metabolically demanding. So it needs a lot of good calories all day long. It's always on, it's always working. Even when we're kind of relaxing. That's the other thing to talk about, is the default network in the brain. So there's kind of a, when we're peaceful and we're relaxing, if you want to say daydreaming, your brain is kind of assimilating what it's done all day, what it's seen. So that's another reason to have fun and relax. And now we're telling you, go look at this. You get to play, have fun, relax, and you get to kind of veg out on the couch for a bit because you get to let your brain kind of enhance and kind of process all the information you gave it all day, because it doesn't mean it's not doing anything. It's actually kind of coordinating and shifting and filing, if you want to think. It's kind of processing where everything goes. So that's kind of a neat thing too. So these are all renewal moments, that you need to give your brain little of those renewal moments. And also, I'm sure you can tell us way more about a healthy diet throughout the day, throughout the night, something that will last, because your brain needs it 24/7. It always needs some good healthy nutrition. Billions of
Yeah.
nerves working up there, billions and billions of nerves. I mean, that they think almost 90 billion nerves that need, good energy.
Yeah. And I think what people don't realize is that the brain runs on sugar. And
Hmm.
so, and it doesn't have to be sugar like gummy worms, which
Hmm.
people who listen
Right.
to this podcast know is my, secret, not so secret anymore, fixation. But, having those, not all carbohydrates are the same. So having those
Right.
good carbohydrates is giving a sustainable source to the brain,
Hmm.
as a source of fuel, because the brain can't function or can't utilize fat, for
Right.
example.
I had a gentleman recently ask me, like, I don't know what's going on at work. I just can't, I think I have a memory problem. I think I have memory. I was like, okay, well, let's just talk about what you're eating for breakfast. I'm eating 2 ho-hos, maybe 3. And I was like, wait, what? Pardon
Oh,
me.
I
He's
haven't
like,
heard those in a long
I didn't
time.
even know, right. I didn't even know they were still out there. But he was like,
Right?
well, you know what? My wife always makes good dinner, but I eat ho-hos for breakfast. I was like, I think there's an opportunity there. Just, how can you expect your brain to remember anything? Because he's like, I really know what I'm doing. He had this job that he's done a long time. He's like, I know what I'm doing, but I feel like I'm forgetful. Like, well, that's because you need some good
Your brain needs the
resources.
proper nutrients. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also know that there's information and data around the immune response to things like creativity in very specific terms, like your white blood cells or your infection fighting cells being boosted through like connection, or even your response to vaccination, which is something that is very much a hot topic item.
Sure. Yeah.
I'd love if you would talk a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have been hearing lately about the flow state, like something that you do that you would lose time. Like you would like, oh my gosh, I can't believe an hour went by when you were doing something. I mean, I like to do some crafts or something, and I look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's already, or making like our own body lotion with my daughters or like sketching or something, and all of a sudden I lose time, and so then you think, what just happened, and but you can imagine that my blood pressure was low, my pulse was nice and low, and my breathing was probably nice and long and slow. And so those are the good times again for the immune system during those experiences where you're doing something you really love and that distracts you. Um, and like you said, even if you're with someone that you really care about and you are caring for or care about, that matters as humans too. Like we talked about, we're tribal people. We really need others around us, no matter what you say. Like people are challenging. I mean, they bring some challenges into our lives. They don't always do what we want. But having others around us is really important. I love the studies, especially about like social networks, saying if you mapped out, who you see, the 10 people you see most in your life, do any of them exercise or eat healthy? Because it will matter for you and your behaviors, because you just share resources and you talk about things. And so the people you see the most will bring opportunities into your lives, into your life. And it's really neat to think about. And it's something to be strategic about, because if somebody moves away or somebody like thinking like, I don't really have anyone that close to me that ever talks about a healthy diet or what they're doing just to learn about nutrition, etc. Go out and find someone, or find someone at work. Like, can we talk about this once in a while, or share a recipe once a week or something like that, because the more we do that strategically, that more it helps our well-being, which is really wonderful news.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I feel a little bit remiss talking about connection right now because
I
so many
know.
people are feeling disconnected. But what we were discussing even before we started was that in a way, because of this circumstance, we've kind of dialed into some of those networks that we wouldn't have otherwise dialed into, like these online communities. And as a result, have found people, colleagues across the country, as in our case, that
Mm-hmm.
we would have, were it for not for COVID. I don't think I would be searching for colleagues to interact with on the other side
Mm-hmm.
of the country, because I'd be, interacting with the ones that I know in my own, place of work. So I also know that for my patients, a lot of them are finding these networks through like exercise groups, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
even a lot of these wellness groups and practices, programs that are popping up.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways in which we can still do this work, even though it's different, as you mentioned at the beginning. It's
I
different, but
agree
not
with you.
necessarily not just as nourishing.
I agree with you. Yes. And I do think there are some things that I will certainly keep throughout that I started over the last year. And I agree. I mean, I have met people, nationally and globally, honestly, just through online communities of shared values. I love to talk about, like this, like sharing good news and figuring out ways to help, my patients and friends and family, really be able to understand health and how to, put it into their lives and to show the importance of just being intentional about it, to set up a plan, an action plan, something that can work for your life, and schedule yourself in. Yeah. But yeah, I'm there are things I won't give up after COVID that I only started because of COVID, which is I'll be grateful for that part. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, as our time is coming to a close, I know that part of your work is coaching coaches to
Mm-hmm.
level up, right? Or coaching leaders on how they can maximize the effort of their teams. And it came to mind that in a way we are all coaches and or CEOs, right? Whether we are truly CEOs of an organization or CEOs of our household, we are coaching some humans, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what would be maybe a piece of advice you would give to the person who is kind of in charge of navigating others?
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I think we hear a lot about mindset. Just change your mindset, or what you need to do is change your mindset, and so we hear a lot about that, but I like to focus on the mind and the mindset that it's an organ, it needs some support. I have an iPhone, but I don't want to know how it works 100%, but I want to know how to optimize it. So I want to know how to optimize the mind and mindset. And there's a few things like we've discussed during our time together. There's things that you can do, and there's a lot you can do without, buying anything. And there's things you can do at home. So I would say start with connecting. Put three priorities: connecting with others in a safe way these days. Think about lifestyle, and that's a big word, but that's what we put in our days, how we live our days. And then emotional connections, emotional processing. If anything, write down your emotions, if it will be once or twice or three times a day, just to see a pattern, because they become less scary when we write them down and they have less power. And we just normalize, yes, we have those and they come and go. And then we can learn how to optimize our brain for really great productive days. And it's very doable. It's learnable. It's a learnable skill. Resiliency
Yeah.
is a learnable skill, and brain resiliency is also learnable.
Yeah. I love when what is practical and effective, right,
Mhm.
also feels good. This is
Right,
where
right.
these things align. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times as a doctor, we say, "I'm sorry, you got to take this medicine, this and this." Like here, now what we're saying is, this is fun stuff. Have fun, connect with others. Good for your immune system. Good for your noggin.
Yeah.
And it may actually help your focus. So this is really good news.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for taking the time to speak with me.
Likewise.
And for those of our guests who are interested in learning more about you, where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's one of the easiest ways. Mary Rensel on LinkedIn, and brainfresh.org is a website, and on Insta, the Brainfresh. And so, yeah, LinkedIn is a good one to start if you want to find me there.
Perfect. Thank you so
Excellent.
much, Dr. Mary. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, stay well.